Good day, criminology students and reviewees. So our topic for today is all about one of the subject of correctional administration, specifically the institutional correction. So in the criminology course, there are subjects known as institutional correction and non-institutional correction to deal with the modes of reforming and rehabilitating offenders. So by virtue of Commission on Higher Education, SHED Memorandum Order Number 21, Series of 2005, that the act of reforming offenders by means of institutions is known as correctional institutions, while the act of reforming offenders by other means outside institutions known as non-institutional corrections. So the subjects Correctional Administration 1 covers institutional correction, and Correctional Administration 2 covers non-institutional correction in the criminology course that must be taken seriously by the criminology students because they comprise 10% of the licensure examination for criminologies. So let's go first to the basic concepts and terminologies in correctional administration. So first, the correction. So the term correction may be understood as a pillar of criminal justice system and also as a process. So correction stands as the fourth pillar of the components of our criminal justice system that are concerned with the custody, supervision, and are in charge with reforming and rehabilitating offenders. It is known by majority of the authors in the field of criminology as the weakest pillar among the pillars of criminal justice system because of its failure to reform and rehabilitate offenders. But this is also due to an assumption that the correctional institutions cannot rehabilitate offenders, which is manifested through the increase of criminalities and recidivism. So the term correction may also be understood as the process of reforming offenders. It is the process of reorientation of the criminal offender to prevent him or her from repeating his deviant acts without the necessity of taking punitive actions, but rather to introduce some individual measures of reformation. So this is to ensure that the public, including the families of the offenders and their victims, that the release of the offenders are no longer harmful to the community by becoming reformed individuals prepared to live a normal and productive life upon reintegration to the mainstream society. So let's go to next. What are the important theories in correction? So first, we have classical theory. And this theory states that men have the absolute free will to choose between good and evil, so that they are liable for the consequences of their acts. This theory maintains the doctrine of psychological hedonism, that the individual calculates pleasures and pain in advance of action, and regulates his conduct by the results of his calculations, so that before men do something, they try to calculate the amount of pain they will suffer and the amount of pleasure they will receive. So if there will be more pain than pleasure, they will desist from doing the act. So classical theory, also known as the free will theory, that was advocated by Cesar Beccaria. So let's go to the neoclassical theory. In this theory, crimes are committed in accordance with the free will of men, but the act of committing a crime is modified by some causes that finally prevail upon the person to commit crimes. So this states that since insane and minors or children and lunatics do not know the consequences of their acts, so that they must not be liable for the crimes they committed. So in this theory, it is adopted into the Philippine legal system as either mitigating or exempting circumstances. When we say mitigating circumstances, they are those which do not entirely free the actor from criminal liability but serve only to reduce the penalty. While exempting circumstances, they are those grounds for exemption from punishment wherein the actor is not criminally liable. Or in short, they are exempted. So another theory is positivist theory. So positivist theory rejected the doctrine of free will and states that criminals shall be treated like patients in the hospitals instead of punishing them. Because in positivist theory, they presumes that criminal behavior is caused by the internal or external factors outside of an individual's control. And they believe that man is sick individuals who need treatment rather than punishment. This theory, also known as Italian theory, because it composed of Italians by the name of Cesare Lombroso, who is regarded as the father of modern criminology, and the two of his Italian students, Enrico Ferri and Raphael Garofalo. And lastly, the eclectic theory. Eclectic theory is the combination of beneficial aspects of classical, neoclassical, and the positivist theories. It is also known as the mixed theory. And take note, the Revised Penal Code of the Philippines, or otherwise known as the Act 3815, is governed by eclectic or mixed theory, which is generally influenced by the classical theory. So let's go to next. Phenology. So phenology is different from correction. So the term penology is derived from the Latin word poena, which means pain or suffering. So it is otherwise known as the penal science that studies the management of prisons, reformatories, and any other confinement units. Penology is one of the divisions of criminology that focuses the study of punishment for crime and or of the criminal offenders, and it's concerned itself with the philosophy and the practice of society in its effort to repress criminal activities. Penology also includes the study of control and prevention of crime through punishment of criminal offender. So when we say punishment, it is the redress that the state takes against an offending member of the society that usually involves pain and suffering. So let's go to next. Correctional administration and penal management. So correctional administration is different from penal management. When we say correctional administration, it is one of the systematic management of the correctional facilities such as in jails, prisons, or colonies, or any other institutions that their primary concern is with the custody, treatment, rehabilitation of criminals or detainees. So it means it is the management of system that brings especially the basic necessities to the criminal and detainees. So who are detainees? Detainees are those inmates who are undergoing investigation, awaiting or undergoing trial, or to those who are awaiting for final judgment. Penal management, on the other hand, this is the manner or practice on how to manage or control places of confinement, such as in jails or in prison. They are concerned primarily with making use of available manpower and resources to implement programs. They are also responsible for implementing policy and for day-to-day planning as in jails and prison. So let's go to next, the nature and trends of punishment. So what is punishment? In its legal sense, it is the redress or personal revenge. Therefore, it is defined as the redress that the state takes against an offending member of the society. And also, punishment in its general sense, it is the infliction of some sort of pain on the offender for violating the law. And according to Sutherland and Cressy, punishment is defined as an instrument of public justice. It involves pain produced by design and justified by some value that the suffering is assumed to have. So punishment is also a means of social control. It's a device to cause people to become cohesive and induce conformity. Thus, it is necessary to restore moral equilibrium and for grounds of social unity or utility. So, let's go to next, the ancient forms of punishment. First, death penalty. In 17th century to late 18th century, death penalty became prevalent as a form of punishment. So death penalty, it is also called as the capital punishment, whereby a person will be punished to death affected by burning, boiling in oil, breaking at the wheel, death by playing, and death by beheading. So I have some example of the capital punishment. First is the death by beheading. So death by beheading is also known as decapitation. Decapitation, it is the total separation of the head from the body of a person, wherein the ancient Greeks and Romans regarded it as the most honorable form of death. So another capital punishment is the death by flaying. So death by flaying, also known as the skinning. Skinning is a method of torture whereby the skin of the victim is gradually removed from the body in a precise fashion. So if the individual survives the initial shock and avoids critical loss of blood during the torture, then they will likely die days later due to infection. So death penalty also imposed in the Philippines and in other countries on the justifications of deterrence, vengeance, or retribution, and also incapacitation. So the penalty of death was imposed by Dr. Cerizal, the national hero of the Philippines, was executed by firing squad due to his strong opposition to the Spanish government. And also by the name of Leo Chagaray, was the first Filipino to be meted the death penalty by lethal injection when he was found guilty of raping her daughter. So another forms of ancient punishment is the physical torture. So physical torture, this was the so-called corporal punishment, rendering physical pain into a person who committed an act in violation of the existing laws, which was affected by mutilation, whipping, or also known flogging, and any other barbaric forms of inflicting pain. So I have some example of corporal punishment, which is the flogging or whipping. So flogging or whipping has been the most common physical punishment through the ages. It is common in England during the Middle Ages as chastisement for a wide variety of crimes, wherein the women were flogged in private while men were whipped publicly. So another example of corporal punishment is mutilation. So mutilation used in ancient and medieval societies. Archaeological evidence shows that pharaohs, or what do you call this, the ruler, or as the ruler of the ancient Egypt or the representative, they often ordered mutilation, and it is according to the law of retaliation. So when we say mutilation, it is simply means the cutting off or causing injury to a body part of a person so that the part of the body is permanently damaged, detached, or disfigured. So, for example, to those thieves, that the punishment is to cut off their both hands. So, another ancient forms of punishment is social degradation. So, the purpose of this was to put the offender into shame or humiliation. This was rendered through branding or pillory. So pillory, a prisoner in a standing position with the head and hands locked in place. Both devices exposed the prisoner to public scorn. And while confined in place, prisoners were frequently pelted with eggs and rotten fruit. In England, they abolished pillory in 1834. So another form of ancient punishment is banishment. So banishment, take note, it is also known as exile. So it is a punishment originating in ancient times whereby the offender was sent or put away from the place of the commission of the crime or the act, which was carried out by a prohibition of coming into a specified territory. So they are required to leave the community and live elsewhere, commonly in the wilderness. So let's go to next, the justifications or the purposes of punishment. First is retribution. So retribution during the primitive days, punishment of an offender was carried out in the form of personal vengeance. So retribution holds that punishment is imposed on the offender in order for the society to vent its anger toward and exact vengeance upon the criminal. It maintains that punishment is a device for ensuring that the offenders pay for past misconduct. So another justification of punishment is expiation or atonement. This was in the form of group vengeance as distinguished from retribution, wherein the punishment is exacted publicly for the purpose of appeasing the social group. So it is an offense committed by a member against another member of the same clan or group, arouse that the condemnation of the whole group against the offending member. So the group would therefore demand the offender to be punished. So another justification of punishment is deterrence. So deterrence, take note, is also known as exemplarity. So it is commonly believed that punishment gives a lesson to the offender that it shows other what would happen if they violate the law. So punishment is imposed upon a person who has committed a crime, that the pain inflicted will dissuade the offender, or the what we call this, the specific deterrence, and to the other persons or the general deterrence from committing crimes. So next, protection. Protection as a justification of punishment came after prisons were fully established. So people believe that by putting or placing the offender in prison, society is protected from his further criminal depredation. So vicious and dangerous criminals are made to serve long terms of imprisonment to protect the public from harm or against their dangerous behavior. So, and lastly, the Reformation. So under this theory, society can best be protected from crime if the purpose of imprisonment is to reform or rehabilitate the prisoner or requiring them to undergo an extensive program of rehabilitation, okay, in order for them to become a law-abiding citizen. So that's all for today. So thank you and God bless.